Hey, everybody, welcome to episode 165 of the Masterclass. My name is still Cam, his name is still Dave, and we're still really happy to be here. How are you, sir?
I am wonderful. How are you?
I am somewhere closer to okay, but that's okay.
That is okay. Yes.
It's been things have changed since we last recorded in my life
Yes.
in a permanent way.
Yes.
Well, I mean, who knows? Currently, they're permanent. But
Right.
I have crazy thoughts sometimes. That was
Sure.
very cryptic. We've mentioned this before in the podcast, and I'm always an open book. We mentioned, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 episodes ago, my wife moved out in November. It is now July. And she wanted a divorce, and she got it. To my dismay, disappointment, other words like that. So that went through 8 days ago. And the one thing that my lawyer didn't tell me, Dave,
Mm-hmm.
is that there would be about 20 complete strangers in the courtroom watching it happen. All the other
Nice.
people that were on the docket for the next hour, to have their cases
Uh-huh.
heard, and all of their lawyers. And so I showed up and we went through the paperwork and all that garbage. And then she's like, okay, we're up, come into the courtroom. And I walk in, and it's not a very big room. So they have certain seats blocked off because, it's not big. We have to maintain our distance and all that stuff. And yeah, there's like 20 people in the room just watching. And like there's a microphone where you're standing and then speakers where everyone's sitting. So it's like everything is
Oh,
crystal clear.
weird.
And I was like, you have got to be kidding. It was not great. And then later that day, I took my daughter out she rides her bike and I ride my one wheel. And I crashed in the parking lot really, really, really bad and cut up my arm and my ankle and my leg. And I went from going like 15 or 16 miles an hour to straight into the asphalt in about a half a second. And so last Monday sucked real, real, real hard. And we actually intended to record that. We intended to record that day too about the
Yes.
passage we're talking about tonight, but not just those circumstances, but other circumstances as well dictated that we only had about 20 minutes to chat, and then we had to move on. So I'm thinking perhaps God was looking out for us last week. Like maybe He knew that was enough.
It's just
personally for me to handle in one day.
Sure.
Not that this is about me, but I am a part of it, so that has a little bit to do with it.
Yes. So what I really want to know is have you gotten on the horse, gotten back on your horse again to prevent your fear?
Yeah,
from...
I crashed. I was within 20 yards of my front door. I was in the church parking lot. We were coming home. My daughter's behind me, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to go fast one last time. And I just went too fast, too quick, and I ate it so bad. And Kennedy, my daughter, started crying because, Daddy just, had a come to Jesus moment with the asphalt. And, I said a bad word or two because it really, really hurt. And so she comes up behind me, and I'm bleeding from my left hand. I'm bleeding from my right arm. I'm bleeding from my right leg. At this point, I'm like 20, 20 whatever yards or feet from the front door. I don't remember. But there's like half of that is the parking lot to the grass of my front yard. And I remember standing up and I said, you got to do it. And I got right back on the board and I rode that last, half the distance till I hit my grass. And then I hopped off and then I just went, like I just carried it. And Kennedy's crying because she's never seen a human and asphalt interact in such a intimate way. It startled her, like it startled me, but she was like, she's never seen anything like that, and nor heard the sound of human flesh meeting concrete. So, of course, she didn't take a nap that day, and she's hungry. So she's like crying because she's upset because of what she saw. She's crying because she's tired. She's crying because she's hungry. And I'm trying to pick pieces of rock and dirt out of my open flesh and like pouring cold water over my wounds and trying to not bleed like in my kitchen. Um, and then I had to call the pastor of my church and I was like, Ken, I have a really bizarre question because I realized I have no neosporin and I have no hydrogen peroxide. Because as a dude, those are things you don't really think about needing until you need them.
Yeah.
And I shouldn't say as a dude, as me. I don't think about that stuff until it's like, crisis. Oh crap, I need this. And so because he'd been saying like anything you need, call me, anything you need. And I was like, all right, time to step up to the plate, Ken. So I said, I have a really bizarre question for you. Like I'm holding the phone in between my cheek and my shoulder, like washing my open wounds in the sink while my kid is screaming. I was like, I just need hydrogen peroxide. And so he drove over and brought me hydrogen peroxide and neosporin
Oh, that's cool.
and I fed my child and I cleaned my wounds. And I had forgotten that hydrogen peroxide burns. In my mind,
Yeah.
it just bubbled. So I poured it all down the the rash and the open wounds on my forearm, and it felt like my skin was on fire, which means that it's working.
Yeah.
But all that to say, Kennedy got fed, put to bed. Oh no, we would have recorded Tuesday of last week, so it was the following day.
Yeah.
So I had recovered from my trauma. Some of it anyways.
Some of it.
But yeah, it was an eventful week for me. So thanks for indulging me and letting me sort of share all of that. How are you? Besides wonderful.
Great. Yeah. No, we're good on our end. So
I am glad for that.
thank you.
So we're in the last chapter of James, but I want to make a quick plug here before we fully transition to our main topic for the night. There's a book that I've been reading by one Timothy Keller. You may have heard of him. And it's called Making Sense of God. I think I've mentioned it on the show, maybe in passing, perhaps. But the subtitle is Finding God in the Modern World. And it's Keller's so he wrote the book, The Reason for God, which is a very, logic and reason based approach for why faith in God at least has merit and isn't as, what's the word? Ridiculous as, postmodern people would like to assume. But this book is very focused on taking the stances of current American culture and what they say is true, what they say is false, and really kind of exposing a lot of the double standards that are there.
Mm-hmm.
That the inclusive, um, do your own thing. Truth is relative. You do you, I'll do me. As long as you're not doing harm to anybody, then you can be whatever you want to be. You can self-identify, and in fact, not only can you self-identify, the only person who can tell you your actual identity is you. And all of that, and how that itself is built on exclusivity, and it's just a shift of who the bad guys are and who the good guys are. And so many other topics about what the modern quest and definition for self is versus what the Bible says self is, and how the modern approach to defining self and finding self is inherently flawed in so many ways, versus what not only what tradition taught us. So this is what I often find true about a lot of Christianity is I don't know, I'm sure you've heard this phrase, Dave, the third way. Like
Uh
Jesus is
huh.
God of the third way. Like there's, you know, this way, there's that way. And then there's some third way that is not necessarily a compromise of the two, but an altogether different option that humans often don't choose because of, you know, reasons. And so what he doesn't pretend that the history of Christianity is perfect. There is myriad examples in the history of the church where religion has been used for oppression and violence and selfish gain, and he acknowledges those as wrong, right? And so what is great is he'll take the traditional view of things, point out its flaws, take the modern view of things, point out its flaws, and then point towards the way of God and Jesus and show how it answers the flaws in the other approaches, but also um, does what the right things that those things do better.
Mm-hmm.
Because he doesn't completely slam postmodernism, because the amount of good that has come out of human um, the human value found in postmodernism, right? Like traditional view would be slavery and oppression and staying in your class or your caste, depending on your cultural um, context. And if you were born a potter, you will stay a potter because that's what you do and that's where you fit in the system. And because of things like the Enlightenment back in the day, and even more so the postmodern movement of individuality, there are certain negative things that have come about it, which I think are pretty obvious. But the other viewpoint is that the value of human life, unless you're, you know, a fetus, has been valued more for minorities and for women. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. But is it still 1600? No.
Mm-hmm.
So he tries to balance the bad and the good of the postmodern worldview and like the more traditional worldview, but also compare it against what God would say is the right way, and it's really 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 well done. I think I did a mediocre job explaining some of it, but like without just reading quotes for the next 30 minutes, I think that is a good summation. I will just like real quick just share some of the chapter titles so you get a better idea of what it's about. There's three parts to the book. Part one is why does anyone need religion? Part two is religion is more than you think it is. And part three is Christianity makes sense, which there's a hook for people that think that's a ridiculous thing to say. Um, isn't well, some of the chapter titles isn't religion based on faith and secularism on evidence. Um, and then chapter three is a meaning that suffering can't take from you, which is a cue to the fact that postmodernism and the current so like I there's postmodernism and then there's like kind of what we're living in now, which is like postmodernism, and there's I forget what the term is, but essentially modern secularists don't have a way to process suffering in a way that has meaning. Yet suffering exists for everybody to some extent. But Christians have not only the vocabulary, but Jesus, who suffered for us, yes, yet without sin, as it says in Hebrews 4. So we have a context for suffering and a meaning we can derive from it. And then a satisfaction that is not based in circumstances, um, an identity that doesn't crush you or exclude others, a hope that can face anything, a justice that does not create new oppressors. Anyways, it's really good. I highly suggest it. It's like without all of the end notes, which there are, that's one of the things I love about Keller is how well read he is and how knowledgeable he is of things outside of Christianity. Like his knowledge of classic literature and of theater and of pop culture is really, really admirable for someone in his position. There's 70 pages of endnotes.
Oh, wow.
So, I mean, like it's impeccably done. And it's like 250 some pages to actually read. I recommend it. 5 stars, 2 thumbs up, all that sort of stuff. So, that's that.
Well, I am definitely going to check it out as I think it sounds is it when was it published? This year or
Either 2019 or
29?
2020. Pull it
It just
up.
seems to fit with just
Oh gosh, no, 2016. Holy cow.
wow.
I thought it was last year. Yeah, 2016 is when it came out.
It sounds very applicable to our world today and very much it seems like you have to choose one side or the other. And I don't feel like people are really choosing God's, as you said, the third option.
Well, no, because well, never mind. I was going to make a snide comment and I stopped. Um and what you just said there about picking sides, like the election is in 4 months, 3 months, 4 months. It's in November, right?
Hmm.
So a little over 3 months. And silly Tim Keller made a recommendation on Twitter for a book. And you know me, Dave. Politics, not my jam. Genuinely, they make me upset.
Right.
And he recommended a book, said it was the best book he's ever read on the topic. And I like me Tim Keller and his opinions on things because I think he's incredibly well balanced. I think
Hmm.
he's very smart. I think he is honest about the truth, and I appreciate um his candid nature about things. And so it's a book
Hmm.
called Political Visions and Illusions: A Survey and Christian Critique of Contemporary Ideologies, and it's the second edition. It's not going to be here until August 25th because Amazon. I don't know why. It's going to take over a month to get here, which is fine because I have plenty of other books to read. Um, but I started reading it. You get the free Kindle version when you buy it on Amazon now, I guess. Or maybe
Hmm.
they gave it to me because it can take a month to get here. I didn't really know. But it's essentially trying to understand why certain groups of people marry their politics and their religion so inseparably that you can't tell where one starts and where one begins, whether that be super liberal or super conservative, right? But it's I'm really excited to read it. It's like 330 pages though, um, and it's about politics, so it's going to take me a while to get through, I think.
Hmm.
But just having the research done for me, having the arguments made, having the vocabulary um, accessible, I think will be a very helpful thing for me, especially with the students in my youth group
Hmm.
who, I've had one kid, he's like, I can't talk to my parents about politics because all they do is watch Fox News. And he goes, and if I say anything that doesn't fall in line with what Fox News says, I just get, and so, because like we were talking about, the Black Lives Matter movement post the death of or the killing of George Floyd. And, we spent a couple weeks in the youth group just really digging into what does that mean? What does it look like? Not just in general, but like in our town. And our town is, I think it's uh, like 40% white, like 35% black, like 30% Hispanic, and then the rest is like, Indian or East Asian. There's like, it's a pretty diverse city. And so what does that look like? And he was just so frustrated because like he didn't know how to even broach the subject with his parents, and he's a mixed kid, white and Vietnamese. So he even has that to deal with of, not fitting the Asian kids or the
Hmm.
white kids. Um, and so I'm just excited for that book to help me better understand the concepts and the reasons why someone would be so um, gung ho about their political view and make it about Jesus at the same time, which doesn't ever make sense to me. But also the ability to have those conversations with my students, knowing that someone way smarter than me has done a bunch of really, really good work and published his second version. They've updated it. I think the first one came out in like '06, maybe, or maybe late '90s, but they've updated it
Mm-hmm.
for the current climate. And I'm just really excited that resources like this exist so that I can
Yeah.
be a better I can understand better what's going on. I can have more empathy for people that I think hold religion and politics way too close together, especially if I disagree with their politics. So hopefully I can gain empathy and understanding, and then that will cause me to back off on a lot of my comments that I say under my breath towards people like that, but then also use it to help my students understand. Because for a decent chunk of my students, the next election they'll be able to vote.
Oh, wow.
Not this one, but the next one, most of them will be. And so being able to process that sort of stuff with them this time with a better foundation for it is something I'm excited about.
Cool.
That was supposed to be like a 30-second section of like, hey, here's a good book. Um, but we all know me. If I get excited, I don't shut up. I just talk. So thanks for
All
hanging in.
good. No, it was all very good.
I don't know, I've like recently like this is gonna sound so cheesy. I've like recently fallen back in love with reading, Dave.
Mm-hmm.
Like I told you, I've read like 80 pages in the last 4 days, which for someone who reads, they're like, I do that in
Yeah.
an hour. Well, but like I probably haven't read 80 pages in the last 4 months. So it's a big step for me. But like I've always loved books and I used to read all the time, but I got super away from it. Like quarantine, I went into it with good intentions and I just played video games and ate pizza. Like so anyways, I'm finding I have refound the the intellectual rigor of reading books to be
Mm-hmm.
very stimulating, very enjoyable. So if I talk more about books on the show in the future, it's because um, I don't know. I feel like perhaps God has lit a fire under my butt in a few places in my life, and one of those is how I spend my time and what I do with it, and what I
Yeah.
desire to do uh, on this show with my students in my personal life, what goals I have, and I think reading is a foundation for all of those. And I read for an hour and a half last night in like prime video game time, and I was like, I'm
Ah.
so happy I'm reading. I'm so happy I'm reading.
Yes.
Things are changing, Dave.
Good. Very cool.
Shall we read from another book? Perhaps the one
Sure.
we came here to discuss?
We could do that. All right. So we're at James 5. We're going to do verses 1 through 6. Come now, you rich. Weep and howl for the miseries that are coming upon you. Your riches have rotted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver have corroded, and their corrosion will be evidence against you, and will eat your flesh like fire. You've laid up treasure in the last days. Behold, the wages of the laborers who mow your fields, which you kept back by fraud, are crying out against you. And the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. You have lived on the earth in luxury and self-indulgence. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered the righteous person. He does not resist you.
All right. What do we say about James and not pulling punches?
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So we have, how do you say? It's pretty, I think, safe to say that Jesus has strong opinions about rich people and the kingdom of God.
Mm-hmm.
I do believe the phrase is it's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich person to enter heaven.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, being the wannabe disciple I am, I want to be like, well, what's the line for rich? How much does one have to make a year in order to be called a rich? Um, because I know that a camel cannot pass through the eye of a needle because physics,
Mm-hmm.
and I also know that while I am not wealthy, I make, especially for now a single guy, pretty good money. And I know that I like nice things. And I know that I like to spend money
Mm-hmm.
to have nice things because I enjoy them, but also I think because where I grew up, having nice things was a status symbol. Now, everywhere having nice things is a status symbol, not just where I grew up. But I think because where I grew up and because like my parents made good money, but like I had a friend who had a convertible Mustang on his 16th birthday. But I also went to school with kids that drove Mercedes and Land Rovers and BMWs.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't, not only did I not get a car, I didn't own a car until after I graduated grad school because I was cheap. I didn't want to, and cars are expensive, right? But like we always had more than we ever needed. We always lived in a nice house. My mom let me drive her car whenever I wanted to. We went on vacations. We were very, very comfortable. But when you live in a place where very, very comfortable is maybe 30% of what other people have, you learn very quickly how nice things differentiate people,
Mm-hmm.
be it cars or homes or vacation homes or trophy wives or, what have you, right? Tennis courts, pools, jacuzzis, boats, jet skis, like the idea of opulence and showing what you have to other people. Um, and so I'm very, I think, self conscious about money and about what it's spent on and how it's saved and how it's invested and this, that, and the other thing. And so when I hear Jesus and hear James talking about, you know, being rich and dealing, with finances and all of the things that accompany that, it makes me wonder
Mm-hmm.
how where am I on this scale? Am I going to be the one weeping and howling for the miseries that are coming upon me because I
Right.
have a good job that affords me nice things?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. And like, I think part of it's about generosity and motivation. Like, I think there's no sin in having a good job that pays you well, but I
Mm-hmm.
think it's the motivation for why you seek that salary and what you do with it for sure. But I don't know. It's passages like this are very, um, the word, they're conflicting for me, Dave. They cause inner turmoil
Yeah.
and cause me to question. a lot of stuff. Not just like, am I safe? But also, what am I doing with the resources that I have?
Sure.
And usually the answer is spending it on myself or saving it or saving it so that I can spend
Sure.
it on myself or my daughter at a later date should the need arise, which is
Yeah.
a wise thing to do. But where's the generosity, right? Where's the
Mm-hmm.
giving? Where's the sacrifice? And that's, I think, particularly for me, hard to navigate.
Yeah. Um, so I was trying to find this somewhere, but it's not quickly coming to me of, basically if you live in America and you make $40,000 a year, um, it's not coming up, but really $40,000 a year and living in America, you're wealthy compared to the rest of the world. And
Well, crap.
I can't. I'll continue to look for this and see if I can't come up with it. But yeah, it's pretty humbling when you realize just how well off we are, and then if you take it over the course of all of history, then it's like it's even higher in terms of um, where we land. So yeah, it's kind of humbling when you realize, wow, I really do fall into what would be considered rich or wealthy. Um, and it's like you said, it's having money in and of itself is not necessarily the issue. It certainly is the what do I do with my money? What is my focus on? Um, and even as I say that, I know for me personally, it really is kind of a well, that didn't really help much at all. I certainly, like you said, and it's not like, and again, even as I say that, it's not like I'm spending it on frivolous things, but it is certainly focused on my comfort and making my life better or easier, and not so much on um, living without or making sacrifices or providing for others. So yeah, we're kind of on the hook in terms of when it comes to having money.
Well, let's read on, shall we? As your riches have rotted, and your garments are moth-eaten. So, okay, so what I assume James is getting at here with this whole passage is the concept of storing up treasures in heaven versus treasures on earth, right? And the
Mm-hmm.
whole concept in like Ecclesiastes, where he says, all these things I have amassed, and I have to leave them for someone who didn't earn them. Like
Mm-hmm.
I do all this work, I toil under the sun for decades, and I build all of these things. I gain this wisdom, I gain this money, I gain this experience, and then when I'm dead, I can't do anything with it. I just
Yep.
have to leave it.
Yep.
Um, and so I think that's what James is getting at here when he says like your riches have rotted and your garments are moth-eaten. Like, yeah, great, you got stuff now. It doesn't last. You
Mm-mm.
don't last,
Nope.
nor does it. Which is, I don't know. There's like two schools of thought there, right? Well, if it doesn't last, then I should either just spend it all now and have a really good time and live it up and enjoy everything that I have, or I should give it to other people
Mm-hmm.
to make their lives more tolerable. And one is selfish and one is selfless. Because
Yeah.
your gold and silver have corroded, and their corrosion will be evidence against you and will eat your flesh like fire. Yikes.
Yeah. No. Hello.
You have laid up treasure in the last days. Behold, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, are crying out against you. And the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. Uh oh. You have lived on the earth in luxury and self indulgence. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered the righteous person. Not that okay, that he does not resist you part. Who's he? Who's he? God, the righteous person? It's not like I don't know. I don't have the Greek, and even if I did, it's been 10 years since I studied it. So scratch that 12. Oh my gosh.
I guess it's the righteous person.
Interesting. What I think is interesting about verse 4 is like even in the midst of James kind of laying out the future of
Mm-hmm.
people that are dependent upon their riches for their meaning, for their purpose, for their value. Um, is that even in the midst of that, as they, you know, for all intents and purposes, screw people over, you kept back money, the wages of the laborers who mowed your field and harvested it. Even in the midst of calling these people out, he still can't help but say, "Oh, but yeah, but their cries are heard by the Lord." Like even in the condemnation he's putting on these rich people, he still can't help but share
Mm-hmm.
that God hears the cries of his people and those that have been wronged and those that have lived a very hard life and those that, you know, are poor or meek or we can even get to the beatitudes here, right? People that are downtrodden that have been trampled on by self-aggrandizing, important people, serious air quotes there, unimportant. I just because like he doesn't have to put that there.
Mm-hmm.
Like the sole purpose of this is to call rich people out and say, you know what? You've put all of your eggs in this basket, and that basket's about to get burned up. And because of that, so will you. So he doesn't have to mention the fact that the cries of the people that have been trampled on by this person that represents, a whole slew of people, God hears those people.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's important because it serves as a bit of a teaser for what's coming next in verses 7 and forward. He says, "Be patient, therefore, brothers, until the coming of the Lord. See how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, being patient about it until it receives the early and late rains. You also be patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at
Mm-hmm.
hand." Like I'm gonna lay it on these people here. I'm gonna let you know God hears you, and then after I've put these people in their place, I'm gonna focus on you and what's coming and what God is doing. Um, I just it's just really clever writing, and I appreciate it
Yeah.
because he doesn't have to put it in there, and the next section would still make sense, but he just leaves it in there as like a breadcrumb for what's coming next, and I just little stuff like that. I appreciate it. Makes me want to be a better podcaster and a better writer when I see stuff like that. Especially like in like TV shows. I mean, one, the Bible, duh, right? But like in TV shows and movies where like you don't notice it, and then it happens in the show like 2 or 3 episodes later, and you're like, oh my gosh, they totally, the
They made
foreshadowing.
the
Like, like it's just something simple and innocuous. And then maybe even like a season later, it becomes important. And you're just like, oh, it's so good.
Yeah.
Not really the point of this episode. I just wanted to point out, I have a microphone and opinions, so I will share them.
Yes. So, yeah, I think It really is. Um, this to me is just one of those things that Christians don't like to talk about. Um, materialism being
An issue?
an issue. You
Let's get
know,
more specific, Dave. White people in the suburbs don't like to talk about this stuff.
yeah, that is
Because I mean,
probably
because like that's where we're at culturally right now, right?
yeah.
This is not necessarily just about rich versus poor. This is about education and privilege
Hmm.
and a system working in your favor over and against those that it is not.
Right.
And in the context that this was written, it was for different people. But the concepts and the constructs are the same as they are today, just in a different place in a different time for a different set of people with different colored skin.
Hmm.
And, when we talked about this last week, I was like, I don't really know if how to handle this.
Hmm.
Cause like we're two educated white guys from the suburbs that have good jobs. And now, that being said, you have been a police officer for 20 years
I mean, I'm in my 19th year.
in 19. So that position and that responsibility has certainly allowed you to see many facets of society,
Hmm.
many different people from many different, you know, ethnic backgrounds, skin colors, education levels, like the whole gamut. And so I
Hmm.
think you have a perspective there that most people, say on your street don't have,
Sure.
which is I think to your benefit. But I guess what I'm trying to say is when I read this story, I'm reading it from the perspective of the rich person who's getting the doomsday message.
Hmm.
Whereas someone who lives in my town, 3 houses down from me on the same street, is reading this passage and they're the laborer in the field who hasn't gotten paid
Sure.
and is crying out injustice and is praying that God is going to show up and change that and right the wrong.
Hmm.
And that's my greater conflict, not the selfish conflict of am I the rich person or am I not? And am I okay? Like, how many times must I forgive him, God? 7? Oh, 70 times 7. Oh, crap. Yeah, I'm the rich guy in this scenario, right? And I don't want to be because that means consequences and expectations, right? It's kind of like the passage where it says, um, it talks about teachers of the Bible, how they're going to be held to a higher standard.
Hmm.
Well, crap. I'm held to a higher standard, you know? Um, and it's fascinating to me that I read this and because of, where I was born, when I was born, to who I was born, to the skin of the color I was born in, to the educational opportunities I had, to honestly, like the brains that I was given by God, I was able to, like, society was working in my favor in every possible way,
Hmm.
in every possible way, through no merit on my end. And the fact that I can read this passage and I read it from that perspective, and literally a family 3 doors down from me, can read it, and they're reading it from the perspective of the person who's working in the field and harvesting and is crying out. Like, that is the bigger conviction to me on this passage of I just immediately assume I'm the rich guy. And that is very telling
Hmm.
about my life experience and my perspective on how things are and how the world works. And I think that in this, in the midst of what's going on in my personal life that I shared about earlier, in the midst of what's going on in our communal life over the past few months with the quarantine, right? But then you add on top of that, finally, what seems to be the breaking point with you know, the racial injustice specifically surrounding, police and black men and occasionally black women being killed. Like there seems to be we seem to be at like a breaking point,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm sure that people have said that 20 times in the last
Yeah.
century that we're at a breaking point, right? Martin Luther King was the breaking point. Malcolm X was the breaking point. The entire civil rights movement was a breaking point. And yet 10 years later, and yet, and then this, and then this, and then this, and then this. And I don't know. I am obviously way more aware now than I was a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, um, 3 months ago. But it's one thing to say, oh, I'm aware that there's someone three doors down from me that would read this from the perspective of the other people in the story. Well, yeah, okay, great. Intellectually, I can wrap my head around that someone has a different perspective. But like, how do I learn from that person so that I can gain a better understanding of what that actually means and how that impacts what they do and how they think and how they process their, because I don't know and I can't know right now.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so the step is I acknowledge, yes, someone else may have this perspective, but what good is that, right?
Sure.
It comes down to trying to learn. And I'll never, like, I can't ever know what it's like to be a black man in America. I can't know what it's like to be a Hispanic man in America. I can't know what it's like to be an immigrant, even though my grandparents immigrated here. I was born and raised as a white guy in the suburbs,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't mean that I can't try and learn from people that have had other experiences and try and see the assumptions that I make and what's the word? The conveniences that are there for me that are not there for other people.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. And that's, one of the things I've become very, well, I don't know. That's probably one of the things that I have learned is just particularly after World War II, um, and the development of suburbs, just the amount of effort that went into keeping Black African Americans from being able to live in a lot of those neighborhoods.
Hmm.
Um,
And for the families that stayed in the city, they made Christian schools so that their
yeah.
white kids could go to school with each other.
In Kansas City, it's fairly well known that Troost was the dividing line.
Hmm.
And yeah, I mean, there are actual maps that exist to this, that aren't that difficult to come across of, Kansas City being divided, that you did not sell homes to people um, east of Troost. Or is it west? I don't know, one side or the other. Uh, and so just to kind of even, when people get offended by the idea of having privilege, you know, you only know what you know. You don't know what you don't know. And so I think it's what you said of just we need to make an effort to learn from other people, ask questions, realize that we can live with blinders on, and that while our life may not feel like we had privilege, because life is hard, just period. It doesn't matter who
Hmm.
you are. Our existence here in a fallen world is not easy. Uh, and so, I don't want to minimize anybody's experience, but the reality is open yourself up to the idea that there are people that probably had it worse, or do have it worse than you do. And um, that there is a real possibility that you were not part of a group that was intentionally kept out of, certain neighborhoods, or intentionally had, laws made to make their life more difficult, particularly in different parts around this country that we live in. So, um, just as a side note, there was a website called that I couldn't find. It used to be called the Global Rich List, and I don't think it exists anymore. Um, but I did find a couple other of those, and anybody can Google this stuff in just terms of where you are in terms of wealth. Conservatively, if you make $40,000 a year and live in a household of 2 adults, 2 kids, this is conservatively, even in 2020, you are still richer than 80% of the world.
Oh boy.
So if you make
That's $40,000 for total income.
40,000 total income for a family of 4 in this country, you are still richer than 80% of the people that live in the world.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's hard to wrap my head around.
No, it really is. So, and just even, even I think about just even in my lifetime, the way we handle money or even things. I mean, a TV was a major purchase when I was a little kid. And basically, I remember kind of 1982, 83, 84. So basically, I was like 11, 12, 13. Um, I just remember like a TV being a major purchase. And then I remember getting a VCR. And, you know, the TV that we replaced as, preteen for me was basically the TV I'd remember having my entire life up until that point. And, it just seems like we replace things so quickly, for something in terms of technology to last 5 years. I just think of all the different things that we have: TVs, phones, computers, and that sort of thing. It seems like very few things make it past that 5 year mark anymore.
That's
Maybe
how they
major
get you, Dave.
appliances. What?
Said that's how they get you.
Yeah. Maybe major appliances, TV, washer and dryer, refrigerator, those sorts of things go longer than that. But um, yeah, something that you bought 5 years ago, it really is kind of obsolete. You almost can't use it. We've become such a disposable society. So anyway.
Disposable Society. The name of my next emo album, Dave.
Oh. But yeah, so I think I think it really does just come down to just, being submissive to God and just realizing what we have and just really giving it to him and allowing him to use it, and not to hold so tightly to things, because they really do. They fail us. Um, we've been in our house for 5 years now, and it's just funny the number of things that are starting to break and have to be replaced. And just even caulking the outside of the house after 5 years. I mean, we have leaks all over the place, and they're not terrible. And, it's not like we're destroying our house, but I'm like, man, there's a lot of work that goes with having this house that's only 5 years old. So,
well, they don't make them like they used to, Dave.
No, that is definitely true. And things just do not fulfill like God does.
True. I think that's a good statement to end on.
Wonderful.
All right. I can take a hint. Anyways, that's the end of this episode of the Masterclass, episode 165, title of which is yet to be determined. So if you want show notes, you can look in your podcast app of choice they're going to be there. Also, you can go to supermegacorp.net/masterclass/165, and the links to all the good stuff will be there, including links to say hello either on Twitter or Instagram for me or email. Also, a phone number if you want to call into the show. We would love to put your question or your comment on the show to share with the rest of the folks that listen. And thus concludes the business.
Yes.
Farewell.
Bye.